introductions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I see new faces, which is really exciting for me because I think the domination of this room is people that I've worked with in some capacity. So hello, my name is Mina Matthews. I'm a senior instructional designer with University College. That means that I work with faculty who teach at a distance in many iterations of that definition on every campus, which is why I am so pleased to see so many familiar faces from multiple campuses in this room.
Yeah, and my name is BJ Kitchen. I'm a senior e-learning specialist with University College. And again, I've worked with a lot of folks in here and a lot of folks I'm seeing for the first time, and I hope to work with you in the future, wherever you might be. As you know, we can travel. We have gumption and will travel and to support you wherever you are. I've been with UC now at I think a week less than Mina. And prior to that, I was at the University of Maine in a couple of positions, working with the Margaret Chase Smith Policy Center and with the Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Studies. So glad you're here.
And you'll have to excuse me today. This is my first time working with a lapel mic, and I've already hit my chest like 3 times, and Rich said that was a big no-no. It's going to have a big noise problem on the video that you'll see of this presentation after the fact.
So he's grinning into ear to ear in the production room right at this moment.
Okay, so we're here to talk about developing a cohort. And how to develop a cohort at a distance, which I was very pleased to hear the president of UMA discuss today in his opening remarks, that lots of faculty are already doing this. And we tend to think of developing a cohort at a distance as a real challenge. And it's not if you have the right scaffolding in place, if you have the right edges to that experience. So today we're going to talk about some different types of cohorts. We're going to look at developing cohort models. What are your responsibilities as an instructor to help form a cohort? And we're going to learn 3 or more tools to support online cohort development. And when I say cohort, we will go into a deeper explanation of what that means, what that term means. But there's a variety of cohorts that you can create, and it will depend on what your level of interest is, what you're trying to create with your students.
And I would just, I think what a great session to come to after some of the panel discussion and of course the president's talk, because we're really talking about that those 7, 8, 9, 10 kind of practice levels where particularly if you take some of what Jody had to say around what I'd like to call that empathy model, where she's really seeing that she's got to teach to the whole curve, right? Not just these extraordinary folks or slightly above average, but everybody who showed up for whatever reason, whatever their needs are, assess what those are, and find a way to include them. And that's, I think, part of what you have to do to create an inclusive cohort. So something we'd like you to do right off the front is take a look at this question. When you introduce work that requires students to take responsibility for their learning and work in groups, and so that we're obviously insinuating that that's part of creating a cohort, responsibility for taking their learning and work in groups, how do they typically respond? So what do students typically say or do when you say, okay, folks, we're going to have you do this in groups?
Oh, I can feel the cringe. Even though they're all online.
You can feel it through the interwebs.
I've been in groups before. It's been a disaster.
Okay.
Yep.
So I will coach them through how we're going to do our group.
But they're not jumping for joy, is what I hear.
Not jumping for joy.
What do other folks say?
There's often a concern that there will be a diffusion of responsibility, and so that some students in the group won't take responsibility, and that they'll have to take on disproportionate.
So they're concerned about everybody, and I use my words, pulling their weight, contributing appropriately, that it's not going to all fall on a few, all the work, all the responsibility, the leadership, and that it changes the productivity of the group and success.
Oh, how does this work? I can't do it.
How does this work? I can't do it. What do I need to know how to do? Right. Go ahead.
I think some see no value in seeing the work of their peers and really want, the mastery of the teacher's word, knowledge.
Sure.
Why do I have to listen to these people? They don't know this stuff.
Right. Right. Good. So if I just do this and you, instructor, just kind of pour it in.
That's a correct. They're
That'll be
looking
good.
for the flip top head.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. Anything else?
One concern is how do we figure out a schedule for everyone to work together, who to meet in person or online?
How can we, right, so how are we going to, particularly if there are any synchronous activities, right? And we know that we can't just bill online learning as completely asynchronous. I mean, we've done that, and it's not gone very well when folks show up to a synchronous activity. They say, wait a second, I was supposed to be at the beach. if you could each take some of these and pass them around. I wanted to give you this printed because it's our next slide, and as you can see, there's a lot of text on it, so it's not great for a slide. So if you have it in hand, you can probably read it a little better. This next slide I'm going to show you is actually a paper where some study was done. This is a long time ago too, I think 1994, where they talked about introducing personal ownership in the learning with the students. And these are the sorts of things they saw the students go through, this almost grief process. Shock. You know, for the psychologist, that's those, denial, right? She can't be serious about this. I'm not going to ignore it. Maybe it'll go away. Strong emotion. I can't do it. I think that was, Frank, you said that. I can't do it. I don't know what to do. Resistance and withdrawal. Maybe that's part of the reason why some folks check out. So I won't read all of these to you, but any reactions to that? I mean, this affirms what you said, I think. But the good news is when you get down to 6, 7, 8, if the process has, had strength and been clearly defined and consistent and persistent and accountability's been built in and the grading expectations are clear, they return to confidence. Hey, I may be able to pull this off. And integration to success. Yes, this stuff is right on. I don't understand, yada, yada, yada. Any reactions to that? Have you seen success like this happen in any group work that you've done?
Well, it's late in the course, I'm afraid.
Yes.
That's a good observation. So that raises questions about when to introduce the meat and potatoes of group work versus kind of the entry-level, lower stakes practice stuff so they get ready for the important cognitive activities.
And how do you do those lower stakes practice moments at the beginning of the course? Are you all doing icebreakers in your online class? Are you all giving your online students a chance to meet each other on a low stakes environment where they can get comfortable with one another socially before they can do the important work of group work?
You'll all receive, if we don't show it today, a pre-course letter written by one of your colleagues at UMPI, or we worked with to write with one of your colleagues at UMPI, where the students that were going to be in her online course and we're going to have some significant group work responsibilities received orientation to that work a month before the course started. And part of that had to do with not wanting them to show up day 1 and then drop out day 4. So that was part of it. So moving us right along.
So some different types of cohorts, and these can be managed at different levels of your organization depending on how your cohorts are working. You have structured assigned cohorts, and these tend to be assigned by administration, meaning say a cohort from Bath Iron Works comes to mind, and their employer wants to funnel them through a degree program. Typically the administration will cohort them together and try to put them in all of their classes together through that program. So that doesn't happen at the instructor level typically. Structured functional cohorts are cohorts that occur based on the function. And so that's probably the one that you are most familiar with. That is when you would create a cohort of, let's say, grades 6 through 12 teachers in your education program, where you have in one cohort a 6th grade teacher, a 7th grade teacher, an 8th grade teacher, so they can all speak to each other's different models. So, and the function there would be the outcome. So they are structured by the project they're going to deliver, the specific learning goal that you have created for them. And then the informal functional cohorts, which I think is often the one that is the most skipped in the online environment. And this is that opportunity for the students to come together informally, like they would in a face-to-face environment, as they walk out that door and mingle in the hallway, and develop those strong relationships with one another that drive them through the college experience. And this is the one that in an online environment seems to have the most barriers for creating, because how do we create that social space when we're online we expect to be working every minute? But we still need to create that space, because those social networking connections, that informal cohort, I mean, how many of you have friends from college that you're still in touch with? All of us. We need to give that to our distance learners as well.
How many of you folks here are from UMaine? A few from UMaine. I say that because I realized when we were writing this up that there's an informal cohort, function cohort that I was part of developing from its early outset, and today is on Facebook, and it's hundreds strong. And so I encourage you folks, everybody here can check it out. It's Maine New Leadership. I don't know how many people have heard of Maine New Leadership. It's a program that's put on by the Margaret Chase Smith Policy Center, but it's a week-long summer course for women to be introduced to public leadership, to learn. They meet with senators and business folks from all women in leadership to learn those skills. And one of the things they do is they have some of their experience online from the outset, where they have a Facebook community where they continue the conversation around the work of being women in leadership. And this has grown over the years to hundreds strong. They have class photos, they share their work, they share their progress, they ask questions. And so it's on Facebook. If any of you have a Facebook account, you can look it up. It's a great example of an informal functional cohort right within our own system. I'm sure there are other examples. I happen to know about that one because I helped develop it, and I didn't realize what I was doing at the time. Any thoughts about or reactions to or concerns, or want to flesh out some of those definitions?
Well, is there such a thing as having the cohorts not, let's say, at certain times during the course, but not constantly, not always? In other words,
So like a structured functional cohort where you have a group that comes together for 4 weeks in the middle, but not before or after? Is that what you mean?
Or like just once a week or something.
Well, so you're saying, I mean, I can't picture in my head how, if you've got something that happens in that structure, I mean, it's going to have a beginning, middle, and end, perhaps. And so I guess that would be structured and it would be defined. Can other folks think of an example where there might be a functional strategy to bring a group of students together within the structure of the course, but not for the whole course, and the intention isn't for it to continue afterwards? I could see, can anybody show hands, see how that might work within a course? So yeah, so you might have, a group project, right? Maybe it's a final presentation where you have folks work together in a small group and they have to divvy up the project tasks and then produce a deliverable and then somehow publish or produce that, create that and produce it together. But they don't have to continue with that after the fact.
And I'm also thinking of a slightly less formal version of that. I'm recently worked with the Foreign Languages APRIP group to conceptualize how they would do their work in distance. And one of the things they're talking about is creating this kind of informal space. It's a drop-in time online, using online technology for students to video conference to have conversation partners in their foreign language, using software that's all free and available in the University of Maine system. So that might be another way to get at that. You can have a set time that people can kind of come together online and meet synchronously.
And I know, Frank, you tried that synchronously with Hangouts, where you had weekly optional kind of hang out with the instructor meetings. I do the same thing.
The problem I had was their schedules.
Yep.
I had somebody in Pacific time zone, and I had somebody, working at that hour, and it was just really hard to schedule.
Sure, sure, and I think particularly when you're just getting started at something like that, you've got to do some experimenting so you can figure out where some of those difficulties are. I did something similar. Now, I happen to be a night owl, so I scheduled weekly, I called them colleague consultations for the graduate online course that I taught. And throughout the semester, I had everybody show up, but never everybody all at once. And those sessions were used to discuss the project, which was meaty, or talk about practice problems that they were having in their workplace. It was an instructional design course for online learning. And it was very useful, and it was some of the best feedback I got was that particular optional, functional, but not required experience was an extremely valuable part of the course.
I just finished a class for UMPI as well. We both teach to stay current in this so that we can keep working with you at the best of our ability. And in this class, it was a creative writing class, so as you can imagine, there really needs to be a strong cohort of writers because they're going to give each other some really scary feedback to one another. And so the way that I conceptualized it, and I'll get to that, but the way that I conceptualized it was we used a Google Doc that I created. A Google document is cloud-based, which means everybody can get into that document at the same time or at different times. I created that document and shared it with the people in the group that would be working on each other's papers, and then I gave them set times. I want you to have your first deliverable by this time. I want you to actually communicate with each other by this time, and then I want you to do something with that communication by a time after that. And these cohorts, I was blown away. My 13 students, of them, 11 decided to take that work outside of class, and they are still meeting in their workshops to further each other's writing. And all of that was done asynchronously. I simply gave them target dates. Do it by this time, do it by this time, get together by that time, in a document. And they're communicating with each other still.
So I mean, there's experimentation here. I mean, as you can imagine, you've probably seen the range of students that you have, and these aren't. There's no panacea here. I thought the screen was moving. There's no panacea here. It's really a combination of your personality and presence in the course. Yes, it's actually your presence in the course. That's such an important part of developing the cohort, but also how the content cognitively makes sense, is relevant and meaningful and not busy work. And these folks obviously took some ownership because they found it meaningful. And I mean, that's the secret sauce when you can pull that off. It's got to be relevant, and as an adult, I got to say, I dig it, I'm doing it, right? And that's not easy to figure out, particularly, I had a conversation with a French teacher from Fort Kent recently. She said, BJ, I really have the other pedagogy down, but what I really need to do is make these horses thirsty because this is a required course and they don't want to be here. So how do I get, and it's hard to learn French when you don't know French. You got to do some hard work. And so to get them to do hard work, her question was, how do I work them out to be motivated to do this hard work? How do I make it meaningful for them? And so we've been working on that. She's actually presenting at the end of the day, I hope you stick around, from Canada on how she used VoiceThread and Google Hangouts to try to accomplish some of that.
So there are some instructor responsibilities for developing a cohort. This isn't something that you can say to your students, okay, I want you to form a group and go. Because in an online environment, even we struggle with that concept. Even when we're in a social network or we're in a professional learning community online, sometimes it's hard for us to know when and where and how to engage. So you need to create the space for that cohort to happen. That's the first responsibility of the instructor. So if you're using a software like Blackboard, learning management system, you might create a designated discussion area in your Blackboard course that is specific for that development and give some guidelines in that area for how it's used. Alternatively, you might consider using social networking software outside of Blackboard. Go where your students are. If they're all already using Twitter, maybe you want to start a specific hashtag where they can have a conversation in that area. You need to define the edges or goals of the cohort. So in the structured cohort model, you have a function, you have an outcome. You are saying, I want you to work together as a group to produce a document, a presentation, something that speaks to our learning objective. In that environment, that would be your edges. Those are your goals. In the informal environment, you need to also give them some edges and goals. And that might be, I want you to go into this group and discover 5 skills that your peers have that you didn't know that they had beforehand. So that they are going into the environment and learning how to deal with the social networking site or learning how to deal with the tool, how to be social online, so that they can come back with that skill set, so that they know how to form that cohort after the fact. Sustain it through graded milestones. Now, this is not always going to work for you, but you can incentivize parts of it. So participation in a face-to-face class is sometimes incentivized. Sometimes we will put a grade point value on that. Other times it doesn't work for that to be a graded function. If you're going to grade it, you can grade it in a variety of ways. So one strategy that I just used was I used a model of what I call 3 before me, and I got that from Ashley Montgomery at UMF. And I make my students prove to me that they consulted 3 resources before they asked me a question. And I created for them a discussion environment where they can ask each other those questions, and it took off like lightning this semester. Because in that environment, I provided the instruction, 1, subscribe to this forum so that you get an email when somebody asks a question. 2, at the end of the semester, if you happen to miss an assignment, I'll let you make it up based on your cumulative participation score. So they knew they were going to have to miss something along the way, and they were robustly engaging with this environment. And this is actually that creative writing class where 11 of them walked off and became their own cohort, their own group. So incentivizing it can be group. You can say, I will look at this at the end of term, and I will grade you all together. And that carrot at the end sometimes can be enough. Encourage group interaction through peer assessment, meaning actually provide some strategy for those peers to report out on how the group is going. So I think it was James that spoke to, there are members of the group that say, well, one person's not going to do any work and it's all going to fall on me. Well, empower that person to grade the other members. Say, I'm actually going to factor part of your grade based on how your peers report on your work in this group.
Can I just add another piece to that? I think peer assessment it has a lot of heavenly purpose but sometimes fails pretty miserably. And in the literature, I think one of the things we see is that for students to be able to do that relevantly, and I think you actually mentioned that some students really aren't interested in what their other students are doing or up to. They don't think they can learn from that. We really need to provide them with some training and some guidance, some real good guidance on how to be what I like in social work like to call reliable raters. You know, so that they're doing that peer assessment with strategy and skill that is also transferable to assessments that they'll do as they move on in their professional careers, whatever they may be, doing that kind of thinking about their thinking and their thinking about how others are doing their work and thinking. Those are skills that need to be taught. So just saying we're going to do some peer assessment generally doesn't get you the results you're looking for. But looking at it precisely, what does that mean? What do I need to teach them to do before I ask them to do that? And you'll get better results.
And there are some great workshops on rubrics today for those of you who want some learning on how to structure that assessment process.
Also, give them permission if they're having trouble to ask, have some kind of strategy. Look, we've got 3 members in our group that just aren't pulling it. Can we pull you in to help us figure it out? And be a leader in that particular process if that's feasible.
So in addition, use tools that are made for cohort development. So Blackboard has some tools within it that will allow you to create that cohort. Most commonly would be the discussion board, because a discussion board allows for threaded interaction, and that means I can go in and say something, and then Christine can come in and say something after me, and Amy can come in and respond to Christine and me, and you can see that entire threaded conversation like a web of communication. So Blackboard does that, and Blackboard is our humane system tool. However, there are social networking programs, some of them are actually available through this university system, that are masters at cohort development. I mean, if you've ever checked your Facebook profile, then you know that Facebook is doing cohort development at a level far beyond Blackboard is capable of. If your students are on Facebook, consider a Facebook group. And yes, there are some FERPA things to consider, and there is a talk at 11 o'clock with John Forker that will talk just about that if you need to think
he's
through
going to be really good. So if you want to know the ins and outs of FERPA and security around social media
and protecting students,
class, go see what he has to say.
Yeah, because there was an interesting, just a quick side note, there are interesting things that happen with that, like students who are being cyberstalked and they don't want to make a Facebook profile. So what do you do for that student? You create maybe a pseudonym for them. And just having some preparation for that can help you.
He's going to talk about some of those other strategies.
So go where the cohorts are. And one of the cohorts models that we have available in the University of Maine system is Google+. We are a Google Apps institution. We have @maine.edu accounts are all Google. So you can use that to actually create a Google+ profile and use that to create your cohort if your students are there. You want to go where your students are already. And then lastly, if necessary, assign or democratize group roles. Don't assume that your students have had really strong cohorts in their lives. They may have been that loner that made it through school. They may not know that there's typically one person who speaks out to the rest of the group who organizes everything. There's one person who schedules. There's one person who does the research. They may not know that groups can be broken down into pieces. So define what the roles of a group might be, and then either assign those roles to your students so that there's no question who is playing them, or ask them to democratize the process and then report back to you who has the roles.
And then, as I always say with stuff like this, if you're new to cohort development and using all these tools, start small, scale up. Don't try to conquer the top of the mountain when you're standing at the bottom of it. Just take a few steps. What can you do a little bit more this time? Experiment, try some things out so you can see what worked and what didn't work. Look at some literature. There's some great resources out there. If you don't subscribe to facultyfocus.com, I encourage you. Subscribe. I have it on my phone. It's an RSS feed. I read it every day. Written by faculty just like you on cutting edge, really smart writing and topics. Facultyfocus.com, really encourage it. I steal from it all the time.
Borrow, academia, borrow.
Right. Well, I cite them, but...
And speaking of Faculty Focus, Dr. Mary Ellen Weimer, who is a prolific writer for Faculty Focus.
From Faculty Focus.
From Faculty Focus, talks about forming groups and why would we even do this work? Why would we consider forming groups in a distance environment? Because our students, as somebody said, they've had a negative experience with groups in the past. They don't want to do it. They don't see the value of it. So why would we even bother with that task? Well, the truth is the workforce is going to expect them to team. And now that workforce is going to potentially expect them to team at a distance. In my role, I team with members of this room at a distance almost daily. So That's just in my role. That's happening everywhere. If we're not giving our students the skill to develop a cohort at a distance or to do teamwork at a distance, what will they do when they get to the workforce?
My phone has rung, I'm counting 6 times, from my main.edu account telling me that folks in the system are trying to team with me as we speak. And that's the problem of being a little bit too connected. I'm a little aggressive at that. But the point is that these really are real world skills today, and I don't care what you're doing. I mean, as a social worker, I promise you that they're struggling with that. The University of Maine is really working hard right now to put their whole, the social work program on completely online. I know those folks. I graduated from those folks, and they are doing it. And it's a change. It's a challenge. And cohorts and group work, I mean, for the counseling professions are critical. Ethics problems, there's all kinds of things going on. Strategies. Okay, so I have another handout for you. This because obviously, I'll give you some of these. Obviously, that's not real useful. There you go.
You guys can't read that? Come
So again,
on.
if you could take one, pass it around so you can actually read this. So here are some more defined strategies, and we tried to break them into categories, and we hope that they give you something to hang your hat on when you're thinking about the development of cohorts and using technology to do that. We've said some of this already, so this might be just another way to reiterate some of these ideas. But let me see if I can. So, social presence. You want to start with that?
Sure. So social presence refers to the idea that you are not just alone at your computer when you're in an online class. It's a little bit like when you go to the movies and you suspend your disbelief. When you are in an online environment, you want to feel like you are connected to other human beings, and that's a motivator to complete your work. So one of the strategies that you might use to engage in social presence is to have an icebreaker. One of my favorites is 2 truths and a lie because it's really easy to do online. And I always do something dramatic with mine, like my daughter is named for my relative with Jack Kerouac, and I can eat fire. My students always say, well, you can't eat fire, and then I show them a video of myself eating fire, and the icebreaker blows up. So give them something fun from you as well. Because when they have that connection to you, they're going to have a much stronger ability to socialize with one another because you've given them permission to let their guard down a little, to be professional but calm, content. Additionally, consider synchronous lectures. So synchronous activity in an online class can cause a freak out with your students. Your students look at an online class and they think, I'm going to be able to do this in my pajamas at 12 a.m. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You can do synchronous activities in an online class. You just need to plan for it, and you may need to do less of them. So one example of that is I'm working with a new, I think it's French, it might be German, professor at UMF who has just stepped into a class that's going to start in a couple of weeks, wants to know how he's going to get his students together for talking groups in this class, and wanted to start in week 1. We're gonna have weekly group meetings. I said, well, you haven't advertised that in your course description, so you should really get in there with your students and actually schedule a time. And there is software that can help your students develop an actual mutual meeting time. And one thing to consider there is it doesn't always have to be the same time and same day of the week. So that gets at those time zone issues. Maybe this week it's 8 a.m. on Saturday, and next week it's 8 p.m. on Saturday to get at those different groups.
And be creative. I mean, I don't know if you caught this here, this use Twitter, but so your synchronous activity could be you're presenting your lecture at this time, but they might be wherever they are, and you're expecting them to, within a time frame, use a hashtag to tweet about the session you just presented in time. So that's a creative way to get them cognitively engaged in the cohort at the same time. They build anticipation, waiting to see what others are going to post. You advertise a hashtag up front. And so again, maybe you're using Panopto, Adobe Connect, or a Google Hangout on Air. You're presenting your lecture, and you're expecting them to be tweeting about the lecture while it's happening, maybe asking questions, taking notes, those sorts of things. I saw somebody actually do that slightly different scenario in a 70-seat food nutrition course, used a Twitter channel so that folks could ask questions while he was presenting in the 70-seat session, and then every so often he would stop and go to the Twitter channel, look at the hashtag and say, well, there's a good question, let me address that. And that might be from that student who would never ask a question. So a couple of interesting ways.
And a flip on that, I mean, I talked about synchronous because we tend to not think that synchronous is possible online, and it is possible online. But you can also do it asynchronously. I am also an author. I write horror books for children, so I have friends who are authors. And in my creative writing class, I put a word out to all of my author friends, would you do a guest lecture? And I got a bite from somebody in California who recorded this beautiful YouTube video and agreed to actually interact with the students after the fact. So she hosted this lecture on YouTube, and then all of my students went in and asked her a question in the YouTube comments, and she came back and answered every one of them. So you can do that social presence level and create that cohort at a distance asynchronously as well.
Just ready to move us
Flip
ahead.
into, yeah, we're moving on
Getting
time.
there.
Maybe we move.
Well, and this is a big one. We talked about this a bit earlier, instructor and leadership presence. Now, the cool thing about and leadership present means it might not be you, the instructor, that does all the leadership stuff. I mean, that can be assigned. It can be require teams to develop a team charter. There's something empowering about having that be part of the process. Not to mention it teaches them a formal team process that we're all pretty comfortable with, I think, when we work with committees. We look at our charter, we look at our norms. Who's the chair? What are the expectations? How do we vote? What's the process? Give them some of that training and permission to organize themselves prior to getting into the meat and potatoes of the work. The leadership of the instructor to support the work, dealing with group members that don't participate. Give your teams, your groups permission to say, okay, look, we've tried, the three before me, we talked about this, we had an appropriately assertive conversation with this person, we need your help. Coach them to be able to ask those questions. Video conference calls with groups to help them problem solve. Maybe you can't meet with them all at once, but you can schedule different office hours with each of the groups that are synchronous to help them problem solve and strengthen their group. Be that expert over the shoulder, that flipped model where they get their benefit of your expertise to help them solve their problems. Also encourage them to take ownership of it. And going down, a leader of the group can be assigned, and I talked about that. Pick somebody. Maybe it rotates. That can get kind of havoc-y because you don't get somebody developing a critical mass of comfort and skills. But maybe maybe the group picks somebody that will be their leader, and that person has particular roles. And seamless technology. I really think that's critical. We talked about that earlier. I think everybody on the panel up there talked about the importance of making sure we know what the needs are, whether it's marketing work. We know that there's we're not doing things that are irrelevant, so we're not, in this case, using technologies that are superfluous, that aren't going to help us. They got to be seamless. They got to work. They got to do the task that they were intended to do. And they have to, and I think Frank would probably attest to this, they have to be learnable quickly so that people can get to the business of using them for the task rather than stumbling with how to use them in the first place.
So
Yeah.
yeah, they need some hand-holding and instructions for the tool itself, not just the activity. So, and speaking to that, that's actually where I was going to head next in purpose and clear instructions. So when you choose a tool that is going to help you with this cohort model, it's not enough to just say, okay, we're going to use a Google Doc, go use this Google Doc and work with it. You actually need to provide some structural activity instruction method for actually using that tool.
And examples of good practice.
Yeah. And that is often when I deal with online faculty, I think that's the number one thing. I am not a tech expert. How am I going to handle it if my student comes to me and says, I don't know how to use Google Drive, oh no. So that is when that three before me can come in handy. That is when you say, all right, your students are also solving this problem. So have them solve the problem together. Have them go out and find the answer to how to share a hyperlink in Google Drive and put it in that discussion area so that everybody else can see how they solve the problem. That's one example. Another example is University College maintains a rich resource of tutorials for tech tools that you can embed right into your class. So when I required my students this semester to all make YouTube videos of themselves doing a poetry slam in the middle of the semester, I gave them a week of nothing but YouTube practice. Here is a tutorial from University College on how to make a YouTube video. Go make one and then do your midterm exam.
And I'm going to advocate for faculty here too. I think this is where you can reach out to your program directors, your administrators to say, where's our team to help us design some of these universal supports that we'll need in the class, in our online courses for our students. Now my experience is asking that question will usually beget a positive result, but sometimes we need to ask the question to make sure that we're teaming with the right folks on our campus, our media services folks, our instructional designers, our faculty development folks, to make sure that there are some of those universal support tools that we know pretty much every student's going to need, but it's developed and it's maintained and it's available to you as faculty, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you try to teach the course.
So I'm going to pause us right there because we've got about 3 minutes left on the clock. And for anyone who has come to one of BJ and Mina's workshops before, you know we could take you for another 5 hours.
We had until 10 of.
So we have 45, 10 to
Is it?
45. Yep. So I wanted to open this
I was
up
going to invite you to stay.
to questions. There's another group in here. You guys can stay. There is another talk at 11. So we've just bombarded you with a lot of information. We didn't have a chance to get very deeply into the actual tools that are available. If that becomes a question, we might be able to point you to something right now. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask something.
Go ahead.
Concerns about Google Plus
Sure.
and its future? Do you have any insights about
So that's a great question. You know, so I think that what he's talking about is, so Google has this way of saying, okay, we're done with this, and killing it. But we do see them. So what I'm continuing to see, though, is they're continuing to develop it. I'm seeing updates come. I hear in the social sphere folks asking that very question. You know, how long are we for this world? My thought on Google Plus is that what I think we have to be prepared for is to watch it go through some pretty significant metamorphoses. Yep. But I don't think it's going to go completely away, particularly because of some of the significant enhancements that have recently been put in place.
And the same argument can be made for Facebook, which is currently right now at the demographic is what, 39 plus, I think is their mid-range. So where are those non-traditional students?
And what are they
going
to
change? Or the traditional ones,
I mean, talk about somebody who loves changing their app.
And the learning tool used today won't be the learning tool used tomorrow.
That's
beautiful.
If you go back in 10 years in time, Facebook, well, Facebook might have been around a little bit, but you know, Facebook, Google Hangouts, all those things didn't exist.
So heuristics are critical. Teaching the heuristics. You know, what's a notification? What do you mean ping me, mention me? Why do I need to subscribe? I meant to say that earlier.
Oh, right.
Because subscribing, like in Google Plus, I teach all my faculty, make sure everybody turns on notifications all.
Yeah.
Because then if something goes wrong, you've got a bunch of emails that you can refer to. But it also keeps the rhythm of conversation. I mean, if you don't have those notifications on and somebody replies to one of your comments and a week later you notice, oh, it's over. Missed it. But if you're getting those notifications, and so just going back to oh, I know your name too. Hart is your last name, isn't it? Yes, of course I know your name. I just can't remember the first part. What was it?
Mike.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to call you Jeff. So I just renamed you, Jeff Hart.
Careful.
Subscribing to those things and teaching students to know the heuristics so that as things change and as they might use new technologies, they're looking for the mention, the subscribe, they're looking for the way to, what's the profile card?
The structure of it, not the actual tool. Don't get hung up on the tool, get hung up on how you use the tool.
So I have a question that sort of goes beyond what you've talked about, which is extremely useful. So as you said, Mina, in the beginning, that how many of us are still friends with, you know, the friends we made in college? And some of that was because we would just run into people, you know, in the hallways. We can't do that in an online classroom. So we can create friends within the class, but what if the entire program is online and you want to build a cohort of the cohort that is taking, you know, those classes, not at the same time, but they are sort of at a similar stage in the program. So what do you do to build that cohort which is not necessarily going to work together?
I think Walter spoke to that this morning when he said he assigned hashtags to students and hashtags to programs because those conversations could exist outside. Another example, and we were going to show it, but I don't think we have time. We have a virtual writing lab. I don't know if you're familiar with the virtual writing lab that's available to all distance students, and that pulls together tutors from all of the campuses into a learning community, but it also pulls together students and faculty who are using them, and that spans program because there are people who are no longer in school who are still subscribing to that community and still contributing resources to it. So creating a virtual community might get at that. That's actually the graduate course I teach at UMF. You should take it.
And to fire on a few pistons at once. So one of the things when I was working with the Margaret Chase Smith Policy Center that we had a lot of activity with was the Cougar event, the undergraduate research event. And I'm sure every campus has research events where they work with their undergraduates to do some sort of research and then formally present that in practice for a scientific poster or something like that. we can do webinars online with groups of people where we have expectations that they're going to present their research in an online format. And I think we've got to start pushing those boundaries. Those are the 9s and 10s, folks. Those are where I think we start building those cohorts. In my view, that question that you just asked is one of the most important, because it's one of the most difficult right now to solve for. Not impossible by any stretch, but we've really got to look at the seamless tools, the curriculum design, the desire to create those experiences, and before we can be, they're not just going to happen by accident.
So we are out of time. Thank you so much for coming to this
Folks, one
session.
thing you're going to have, I want you to know,
Thank you.
the things we didn't show, you can experience them, I think, in a meaningful way, in a self-guided fashion. They will be included on the website probably within the next few days. We'll email everybody when they're up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank
you
you.
very much.